The broadcast of ashes. The transport fleet moved through the darkness of space like a string of pearls, 18 massive vessels carrying the hopes and dreams of 7 million souls. These were not soldiers or warriors. They were farmers and teachers, engineers and artists, families seeking new horizons on the colony world of Terra Nova. Children pressed their faces against viewing ports, marveling at the stars. Parents made plans for homes they would build. Elderly couples held hands, grateful to see humanity reach for the cosmos in their lifetime. Commander Helena Vasquez watched the fleet from the bridge of the escort frigate Horizon's Edge. Her ship was one of only 3 military vessels assigned to protect the civilian convoy. It seemed like enough. Humanity had been exploring space for 40 years without major conflict. The galaxy appeared vast enough for everyone. Elena was a career officer who had spent most of her service running peaceful patrols and mediating minor disputes. She had joined the Space Corps believing that humanity's future lay in exploration and cooperation, not conquest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her brown eyes reflected the starlight streaming through the bridge windows. She was 42 years old and had never fired a weapon in anger. That was about to change forever. The censor officer, Lieutenant James Park, frowned at his display. He was a young man from Seoul, barely 25, with quick hands and sharp instincts. Something on his screen had caught his attention. "Commander, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures at the edge of scanner range," he reported. "Multiple contacts, military configuration." Elena moved to his station, studying the data. Her experience told her these readings were too organized to be pirates, too numerous to be a patrol. "Can you identify their origin?" "Working on it, but the signatures match Vardani Coalition vessels." James looked up, confusion clear on his face. "But that doesn't make sense. We're in neutral space, and we have all the proper transit permits." The Vardani Coalition was the alliance of 6 species that controlled a significant portion of this galactic sector. They were known for their rigid hierarchies and strict territorial enforcement, but humanity had maintained cordial diplomatic relations with them for decades. "There should be no reason for concern. Hail them," Elena ordered. "Standard greeting and transmit our authorization codes." The communications officer sent the message. Seconds became minutes with no response. The unknown vessels continued their approach, their formation tightening into something that looked disturbingly like an attack pattern. Then every screen on the bridge, every display across the entire fleet flickered and changed. The face that appeared was something from nightmares. Warlord Threxis of the Vardani looked like a massive reptilian predator crossed with an insect. His scales were deep purple, his 4 eyes glowed amber, and his mandibles clicked with each word. He wore armor decorated with symbols that Elena's translator software identified as battle honors. "Humans of Earth," Threxis spoke, his voice carrying through the translation systems with disturbing clarity. "You have been judged unworthy of this space. Your expansion ends here. What follows will serve as instruction to all lesser species who forget their place in our galaxy." Elena felt ice flood her veins. "Battle stations! All ships, evasive maneuvers!" But it was too late. The Vardani fleet had positioned themselves perfectly. Weapons fire erupted from dozens of vessels simultaneously, but they were not targeting the military escorts. Every shot, every missile, every energy beam struck the defenseless civilian transports. The transport ship Morning Star exploded first, its hull rupturing in a blossom of fire that consumed 400,000 souls in an instant. Elena watched in horror as ship after ship suffered the same fate. The Horizon's Edge returned fire desperately, but 3 frigates against a fleet of 50 Vardani warships was meaningless. "Get those civilians to the escape pods." Helena screamed, though she knew the order was futile. The transports were too large, too slow, and the Vardani were too thorough. Then something worse happened. The Vardani stopped firing. 6 transport ships remained intact, but crippled, their engines destroyed and life support failing. Elena watched as boarding craft attached to their hulls like parasites. The broadcast continued. Warlord Threxis wanted the galaxy to watch what came next. Vardani soldiers swept through the transport ships, herding terrified civilians into cargo holds. The cameras captured everything. A mother shielding her infant daughter. An elderly man who tried to stand up to the soldiers and was struck down. Teenagers holding each other as armed aliens surrounded them. The faces were clear enough to see every detail, every expression of fear and desperation. Elena recognized some of them. She had met families during the pre-departure briefings. She had shaken hands with parents who thanked her for keeping them safe on their journey to a new world. Now she could only watch as those same people were systematically murdered. The Vardeni used some kind of energy weapon that dissolved organic matter slowly. Victims did not die instantly. The broadcast showed their final moments in terrible clarity. Hours passed this way. The aliens worked with methodical efficiency, processing group after group while broadcasting every moment to the entire galaxy. Back on Earth, President Sarah Okonkwo stood in the Situation Room deep beneath Geneva, surrounded by military advisors and government officials. She was a Nigerian woman in her 60s, a former professor of international law who had built her political career on peace and cooperation. She had always believed that humanity's strength lay in diplomacy and mutual understanding. She watched the broadcast with tears streaming down her face, unable to look away, unable to do anything to stop the horror unfolding light years away. Around her, hardened military officers wept openly. One young aide ran from the room to vomit. The screens showed no mercy, offering no escape from the reality of what was happening. How many? President Okonkwo asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. General William Torres, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, checked his tablet with shaking hands. 7,043,612 confirmed dead, Madam President. The entire fleet is gone. In the hours that followed, the galaxy reacted. Some species expressed shock and sympathy. Others remained silent, unwilling to challenge Vardeni authority. A few even praised Threxes for maintaining proper order in the cosmos. The Galactic Assembly held an emergency session where ambassador after ambassador offered empty words of regret while refusing to condemn the coalition's actions. Ambassador Raj Patel, humanity's representative to the Assembly, stood before the gathering and saw the truth in their eyes. Most of these species feared the Vardeni too much to help. Some actively supported the genocide, viewing humans as upstart primitives who needed to learn their place. When Raj demanded justice, the Assembly offered to form a committee to study the incident. It would report its findings in 5 to 10 years. On Earth, something fundamental changed in humanity's collective soul. Every city on the planet held vigil for the dead. 7 million candles lit the darkness as people gathered to mourn. But alongside grief came something else, something that burned hotter than any flame. It was rage, pure and focused, directed at those who had committed this atrocity and at the galaxy that had allowed it to happen. Dr. Marcus Chen worked in a laboratory complex deep beneath the Mojave Desert, a facility that officially did not exist. He was a physicist who had spent 20 years developing theoretical weapons systems that violated every interstellar treaty humanity had signed. His research had always been academic, never meant for actual deployment. Now the President herself was on the secure line, asking him a single question: can we win? Marcus looked at the prototypes surrounding him, devices that bent the laws of physics in ways that would horrify the Galactic Assembly. He thought about his sister and her family, who had been aboard the Morning Star, about his nieces who were 9 and 12 years old, about the broadcast that showed their final moments. Yes, he said simply, but it will require total commitment. We will have to abandon every principle of restraint. We will have to become something the galaxy has never seen before. Then make it happen, the President replied. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. Within hours, hidden facilities across Earth and throughout the solar system began activation sequences. Projects that had existed only on paper received unlimited funding and priority status. The peaceful spacefaring civilization that humanity had built over 4 decades vanished like morning mist, revealing the war machine that had always existed beneath the surface. Commander Elena Vasquez and the 2 other surviving escort ships made it back to Earth 2 weeks later. The Horizon's edge was heavily damaged, held together by emergency repairs and the determination of its crew. Eleanor had lost half her people in the futile attempt to protect the civilian fleet. She had watched 7 million humans die while being able to do nothing to save them. When she arrived at Unity Command headquarters, she expected to be court-martialed for failure. Instead, she was promoted to Fleet Admiral and given command of the First Vengeance Fleet, a formation that would include every warship humanity could build in the next 6 months. "We need someone who understands what we're fighting for," President Okonkwo told her during the brief ceremony. "Someone who saw what they did to our people. Someone who will never forget and never forgive." Elena accepted the rank and the responsibility that came with it. She had joined the service to protect humanity through peaceful means. That option no longer existed. The galaxy had shown its true face during those terrible hours of broadcast genocide. Now humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you murdered 7 million of their children. The war began not with a declaration but with silence. Earth withdrew all ambassadors, severed all diplomatic ties, and stopped communicating with galactic civilization entirely. For 3 months, humanity vanished from interstellar affairs, while the galaxy wondered what the primitive species would do next. They would find out soon enough. In shipyards hidden throughout the solar system, new vessels took shape, carrying weapons that should not have been possible. On Earth and its colonies, every able-bodied adult volunteered for military service. Children too young to fight took over civilian jobs to free adults for war. The entire species mobilized with singular purpose. Warlord Threxis watched the silence from his throne world and felt the first stirring of doubt. He had expected protests, diplomatic outrage, perhaps a few impotent military gestures. He had not expected this complete withdrawal, this ominous quiet that suggested something terrible was being prepared in the darkness. He would learn the truth soon enough. Humanity was coming, and they were bringing weapons powered by rage and grief, guided by the memory of 7 million voices crying out for justice that the galaxy had refused to provide. The age of peaceful human expansion had ended during those terrible hours of broadcast genocide. What emerged from Earth now was something the galaxy had never encountered before. It was humanity awakened, humanity furious, humanity ready to teach the cosmos a lesson about the price of murdering their children. The stars themselves would tremble before humanity was finished. The awakening fury. First strike came without warning, exactly as humanity intended. 3 months after the genocide, Vardani patrol ships in the outer reaches simply vanished. No distress signals, no debris fields, nothing but empty space where 14 vessels had been conducting routine patrols. The coalition investigated, but found no evidence of what had destroyed them. 2 days later, a Vardani mining operation on the asteroid belt of Cronus 7 went silent. When reinforcements arrived, they discovered every structure reduced to molecular dust and 5,000 Vardani workers dead, their bodies showing signs of exposure to some kind of quantum dissolution field. The method was disturbingly similar to what the Vardani themselves had used on human civilians. But the technology was far more advanced. Warlord Threxis convened his war council in the grand chamber of his flagship, the Dominion's Fist. His 4 eyes surveyed the assembled military leaders with growing irritation. These were the finest commanders in the coalition, veterans of countless campaigns against lesser species. Now they looked uncertain, almost afraid. "Explain to me how humans are conducting these attacks," Threxis demanded, his mandibles clicking with agitation. "Our intelligence reported they possessed only primitive kinetic weapons and basic energy shields. Yet they strike with impunity and vanish like ghosts." Admiral Krath, a hulking Vardini warrior with scars across his scaled face, shifted uncomfortably. "Warlord, we believe the humans have been concealing their true capabilities for decades. The weapons they used in these attacks operate on principles we do not fully understand. Our sensors cannot detect their ships until after they have already fired." "Impossible," Threxis growled. "We have monitored human development since they achieved faster-than-light travel. They are primitives playing with technology they barely comprehend." "We're primitives," corrected Science Minister Veloth, a smaller Vardani whose purple scales had faded with age. "The broadcasts from their research facilities suggest they have made extraordinary advances in a very short time. Grief and rage appear to be powerful motivators for their species." Threxis slammed a clawed fist against his throne, leaving deep gouges in the metal. "Then we will crush them before they become a true threat. Assemble the 3rd and 5th battle fleets. We will strike Earth itself and end this rebellion." But humanity was no longer where the Vardani expected them to be. Dr. Marcus Chen stood in the command center of Olympus Station, a massive orbital facility that hung in space beyond Neptune's orbit. The station had been built in secret over 15 years, disguised as a deep space research platform. In reality, it was the headquarters of Project Prometheus, humanity's most classified weapons development program. Around Marcus, hundreds of scientists and engineers worked at stations filled with holographic displays, showing weapon designs that would have horrified the Galactic Assembly. Marcus himself looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of continuous work. But there was fire in those eyes, a determination that bordered on obsession. "Report on the quantum disruptor deployment," he said to his lead engineer, Dr. Sarah Kim. Sarah pulled up a holographic display showing dozens of small devices scattered throughout Vardeni space. Each one was no larger than a basketball, but contained enough destructive power to atomize a city. "We have successfully planted 47 devices on key Vardeni worlds and installations. They're undetectable with current coalition technology and can be activated remotely." "And the neural plague?" Marcus asked, moving to another station. "Ready for deployment," confirmed Dr. James Okonkwo, the president's nephew, who had abandoned his medical career to join the weapons program. "It targets the specific neural pathways in Vardeni brain structure. Symptoms include paranoia, aggression toward their own kind, and eventual complete psychological breakdown. It spreads through their communication networks." Marcus nodded grimly. Before the genocide, he would have found such weapons morally reprehensible. Now they seemed like justice. "What about the stellar lance?" "Functional," Sarah replied, pulling up schematics of a weapon that looked more like art than engineering. "We can trigger controlled solar flares on any star within 500 light-years. The energy release would sterilize every planet in the target system. These were not weapons of war. They were weapons of extinction, designed by a species that had learned the hard way that mercy was weakness in this galaxy." Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez commanded the first Vengeance fleet from the bridge of her flagship, the Remembrance. The ship was named after the first transport vessel destroyed in the genocide, and every surface bore the names of the 7 million dead. Her crew walked past those names every day, ensuring they never forgot why they fought. The Remembrance was unlike any ship humanity had ever built before. Its hull incorporated quantum phase technology that allowed it to exist partially outside normal space, making it nearly impossible to target. Its weapons could fire through dimensional rifts, striking enemies from impossible angles. It carried enough firepower to destroy a planet, and Elena had no hesitation about using it. "Admiral, we're approaching the Vardeni supply depot at Helios Station," reported her tactical officer, Commander Liu Chen. "Enemy forces consist of 12 frigates and a destroyer. They haven't detected us yet." Elena studied the tactical display with cold calculation. Helios Station supplied food and equipment to Vardeni forces throughout 3 sectors. Its destruction would cause significant disruption to coalition military operations. More importantly, it would send a message. "Target all vessels and the station itself," she ordered. "Fire when ready. To survivors." The Remembrance emerged from quantum space directly above the Vardeni formation, its weapons already firing. Quantum torpedoes phased through enemy shields as if they weren't there, detonating inside ship hulls and reducing proud warships to expanding clouds of debris. The destroyer managed to get its shields up, but Elena's ship simply fired through a dimensional rift that bypassed the defensive field entirely. The attack lasted 47 seconds. When it ended, Helios Station was a field of wreckage and every Vardeni vessel was destroyed. The Remembrance recorded the carnage, compressed the footage, and broadcast it on all coalition frequencies before vanishing back into quantum space. On Earth, President Okonkwo watched the battle footage in her office, with General Torres at her side. She felt no satisfaction in the destruction, only a grim determination to see justice done. The woman who had built her career on peace and diplomacy was gone, replaced by a leader willing to do whatever was necessary to protect her species. "How many Vardeni casualties so far?" she asked. "Approximately 400,000 confirmed dead," Torres reported. "Another million missing and presumed dead from our covert operations. Their economy is beginning to destabilize as we continue targeting supply lines." "Not enough," Sarah said quietly. "They killed 7 million of ours. They broadcast it for entertainment. 400,000 is barely a down payment on the debt they owe." Torres nodded in agreement. "The other coalition species are beginning to panic. 3 of them have approached us through back channels, offering to abandon the Vardani in exchange for peace. What did we tell them? That we'll consider their offers after Warlord Threxis and every Vardani who participated in the genocide are dead. Not before. The war escalated rapidly as human forces struck deeper into coalition territory. Captain Yuki Tanaka led stealth squadrons that infiltrated heavily defended systems, planting bombs and weapons that would activate on command. Her crews were volunteers who understood they might not return from their missions. They went anyway, driven by memories of the broadcast that had stolen their loved ones. On the Vardini homeworld of Var Prime, citizens began experiencing strange symptoms. They became paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Military units fought each other over imagined slights. The neural plague was working exactly as designed, turning the Vardini's aggression against themselves. Warlord Threxis watched his civilization begin to crumble with growing desperation. His fleets were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. His supply lines were in chaos. His own people were turning on each other, and his scientists could not determine why. The humans had become something he never imagined possible, a species that fought with weapons powered by pure hatred. "We must sue for peace," Admiral Krath insisted during an emergency council meeting. Half the seats were empty now, their former occupants dead or missing. The humans will destroy us completely if we continue. Peace. Threxis roared. They refuse all communication. They ignore every diplomatic overture. They want only our extinction. Then perhaps we should give them what they denied our victims, Veloth said quietly. Mercy. Threxis struck the science minister, his claws leaving deep wounds across Veloth's face. I am warlord of the Vardani coalition. I do not beg primitives for mercy. But deep down, Threxis knew the truth. Humanity had been primitive once, yes, but the genocide had transformed them into something far more dangerous. They had become a species with nothing left to lose and weapons capable of destroying entire civilizations. They had become what the galaxy had always feared, a young race with power and rage in equal measure. Back on Olympus Station, Dr. Marcus Chen received reports of human victories across the front lines. Each success brought him no joy, only a grim satisfaction that justice was being served. He thought about his sister and nieces daily, remembering their faces from happier times before the broadcast had taken them away forever. Marcus, Sarah Kim said gently, approaching his station. You need to rest. You've been working for 36 hours straight. I'll rest when it's finished, Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing Vardani territory. So many targets, so many opportunities to make them pay. The Stellar Lance is almost ready for full-scale deployment. Once it's operational, we can sterilize their core worlds. Is that really what you want? To become as monstrous as they are? Marcus turned to face her, and Sarah saw something frightening in his expression. It was the look of a man who had crossed a line and could never return. They broadcast the murder of 7 million people, Sarah. They showed us children dying and laughed. Yes, I want them to know that horror. I want them to feel what we felt. Sarah wanted to argue, to remind him of the principles that had once guided humanity's expansion into space. But she remembered watching the broadcast herself, remembered seeing families torn apart, while the galaxy watched with indifference. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe this was the only language the cosmos understood. Fleet Admiral Vasquez prepared her forces for the largest operation yet, a direct assault on Var Prime itself. Intelligence suggested the Vardani homeworld was weakened by the neural plague and political infighting. It was time to end this war by striking at the heart of coalition power. All ships report ready for jump, Commander Chen reported from the Remembrance's tactical station. Around them, 200 human warships waited for the order to attack. Each vessel carried weapons that had not existed 6 months ago, technologies born from desperate necessity and unlimited resources. Then let's finish what they started, Elena said. All ships, jump to Var Prime. Today we show the galaxy what happens when you murder humanity's children. The fleet vanished into quantum space, leaving behind only the ghosts of 7 million dead and the promise of vengeance finally fulfilled. The galaxy had tried to teach humanity its place through genocide. Now humanity would teach the galaxy a very different lesson. The age of human restraint had ended. The age of consequences had begun. The price of vengeance, The human fleet emerged from quantum space at the edge of the Var Prime system like vengeful gods stepping from the void. 200 warships arranged themselves in attack formation, their weapons already charging. Before them lay the Vardani homeworld, a planet that had stood for 10,000 years as the center of coalition power. In hours, it would become a monument to humanity's wrath. Fleet Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, studying the tactical display with the cold focus that had become her trademark. The woman who once believed in peaceful coexistence was gone, replaced by a warrior who understood that sometimes justice required absolute force. "Enemy fleet. Composition," she ordered. "We're detecting 347 Vardani warships in defensive positions around the planet," Commander Liu Chen reported. "Multiple orbital defense platforms. Planetary shields are at maximum strength. They were expecting us, of course they were." The humans had not exactly been subtle in their approach to this war. Every strike, every destroyed outpost, every sterilized colony had pointed toward this inevitable conclusion. Warlord Threxis had gathered every remaining military asset to defend his homeworld, determined to stop the human advance here. He had no idea what humanity had brought with them. Status of the Stellar Lance? Elena asked Dr. Marcus Chen, who had insisted on being present for the final battle. The physicist looked haggard, his face lined with exhaustion and grief that would never fully heal. "Fully operational," Marcus confirmed. "We can trigger the system star to go supernova at your command. It will take approximately 3 hours for the reaction to complete, giving our forces time to evacuate. 3 hours to end a civilization. 3 hours to repay the debt of 7 million lives." Elena thought about the broadcast, about the families she had failed to protect, about the children who had called for parents who could not save them. She thought about what humanity had become in pursuit of vengeance. "Hold that weapon in reserve," she said finally. "We'll see if conventional assault is sufficient." The battle began with humanity firing first, quantum torpedoes streaking across space to hammer Vardani defensive positions. The enemy returned fire with plasma cannons and graviton missiles, weapons that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. But humanity fought with technology, born from rage and desperation, and the old weapons could not match the new. Vardani ships exploded by the dozens as human weapons phased through their defenses. Orbital platforms that had seemed impregnable were torn apart by dimensional rifts that struck from impossible angles. The planetary shields flickered and failed under sustained quantum bombardment. In the first 20 minutes of battle, the coalition lost over 100 ships. Warlord Threxis watched from his throne room deep beneath Var Prime's surface, his 4 eyes wide with disbelief. The humans were supposed to be primitives, barely capable of basic space travel. Instead, they fought with weapons that defied understanding, commanded by leaders who showed no mercy. "All remaining forces, engage the enemy," he commanded. "For the glory of Var Prime, for the survival of our species." The Vardani fought with desperate courage, throwing themselves against human ships in kamikaze runs when their weapons proved ineffective. Some managed to inflict damage, destroying human vessels with their sacrifices. But for every human ship lost, 10 Vardani craft were reduced to debris. Captain Yuki Tanaka led a strike force through the chaos, her stealth ships invisible to Vardani sensors until they were already firing. Her target was the Planetary Defense Command Center, a massive bunker that coordinated the homeworld's protective systems. Destroying it would leave Var Prime completely vulnerable. "Deploy the quantum charges," Yuki ordered as her ship positioned itself above the target. Around her, 5 other stealth craft did the same, releasing weapons that would phase through solid matter until they reached their destination deep underground. The explosions tore through the command center like the hand of an angry god, vaporizing equipment and personnel in an instant. Var Prime's orbital defenses went dark, their coordination systems destroyed. The planet lay exposed to the human fleet above. On Earth, President Sarah Okonkwo watched the battle unfold in real time from her Situation Room. Around her, military advisors and government officials monitored the conflict with grim satisfaction. Victory was within reach, the complete destruction of the species that had committed genocide against humanity. "Madam President," General Torres said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from Warlord Threxis. He's requesting terms of surrender." Sarah felt no triumph at those words, only a profound weariness. She had led her species into a war of extermination, transforming humanity from peaceful explorers into vengeful conquerors. History would judge whether that transformation had been necessary or if it had cost humanity its soul. "Put him through," she said. Threxis appeared on the main screen, and Sarah was struck by how diminished he looked. The proud warlord who had broadcast genocide for the galaxy's entertainment now appeared old and defeated. His scales had lost their luster, his eyes their fire. He looked like what he was, a monster who had finally met something more terrible than himself. "President Okonkwo," Threxis began, his translated voice carrying notes of desperation. "I propose an immediate ceasefire. The Vardini coalition accepts full responsibility for the tragedy that began this war. We will pay reparations, surrender war criminals for trial, accept any terms you demand. Please, there has been enough death." Sarah looked at the image of the creature who had ordered the murder of 7 million humans. She thought about the families destroyed, the children who had died crying for parents, the elderly who had tried to protect the young with their own bodies. She thought about what vengeance had cost her species. "Warlord Threxis," she replied, her voice cold as space itself. "Do you remember a girl named Amira Chen? She was 7 years old when your soldiers killed her. Her last words were, 'I want to go home.' There is no home for her now." "There is no home for 7 million others. I understand," Threxis said quickly. "That is why we surrender completely. We will face justice for our crimes. Just please spare my world." Admiral Vasquez's voice cut through the transmission. "President Okonkwo, we have Var Prime completely defenseless. The Stellar Lance is charged and ready. We can end this war permanently right now." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 7 million ghosts pressing down on her shoulders. They demanded justice, demanded that the species who had murdered them pay the ultimate price. But what would that payment cost humanity? What would they become if they destroyed an entire world? "Admiral Vasquez," she said slowly, "stand down the Stellar Lance. Accept Threxis's surrender." Shock rippled through the Situation Room. General Torres stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Madam President, with respect, these creatures broadcast the genocide of our people for entertainment. They showed our children dying and laughed. We have them at our mercy." "I know what they did," Sarah snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. "I watched every second of that broadcast, same as you. But if we destroy Var Prime, we become the monsters. We become exactly what they are. They deserve extinction." "Maybe they do," Sarah agreed. "But we don't deserve to become the species that commits it. We went to war for justice, not genocide. There's a difference, even if it's hard to see right now." On the Remembrances Bridge, Elena Vasquez felt something inside her break and reform. She had spent 6 months preparing for this moment, for the complete destruction of the species that had taken so much from humanity. Now the president was asking her to show mercy to creatures who had shown none. Dr. Marcus Chen stood beside her, tears streaming down his face. "Admiral, please," he whispered. "My sister, my nieces, they deserve this. The 7 million deserve this." Eleanor looked at him, seeing in his eyes the same rage and grief that had driven her own actions. "They deserve justice, Marcus, but justice isn't the same as revenge. I've learned that the hard way." She turned to her crew, these brave men and women who had followed her through 6 months of brutal warfare. "All ships cease fire. Prepare to accept Vardeni surrender." The relief on some faces told Elena she had made the right choice, even if it felt like betrayal. The disappointment on others reminded her that not everyone would understand mercy after what they had witnessed. The surrender of the Vardeni coalition was absolute and unconditional. Warlord Threxis and 3,000 military commanders were taken into custody to face trial for genocide. The coalition's member species, seeing the writing on the wall, abandoned their Vardeni allies and sued for peace with humanity separately. Commander Yuki Tanaka led the occupation forces that landed on Var Prime, establishing human authority over the defeated homeworld. Her Marines were under strict orders to treat civilians humanely, though it required tremendous discipline after what the Vardeni had done. "Remember," Yuki told her troops during briefings, "we're here to establish justice, not commit genocide. We're better than they are, even if we have to remind ourselves of that every day." The trials that followed were broadcast across the galaxy, just as the genocide had been. But where the Vardeni had shown murder for entertainment, humanity showed justice under law. Each defendant received legal representation, fair hearings, and the opportunity to present evidence. It was a stark contrast to the summary executions that had started the war. Warlord Threxis stood before a tribunal of human judges, his translator allowing him to understand every word of the charges against him. He showed no remorse, even as evidence of his crimes was presented in excruciating detail. When asked if he had anything to say in his own defense, he simply stated, "I did what I believed was necessary to maintain order." "So did we," the chief judge replied. "The difference is that we stopped before becoming the monsters. You never did." The sentence was life imprisonment in solitary confinement, a punishment that would last for decades given Vardini longevity. Some humans protested the leniency, demanding execution for the architect of genocide. But President Okonkwo had made her position clear. Humanity would show the galaxy that justice did not require matching the crimes of their enemies. On Earth, memorial sites were constructed for the 7 million dead. Each victim's name was inscribed in stone, ensuring they would never be forgotten. The largest memorial stood at the former location of Unity Command, where an eternal flame burned for those lost. People came from across human space to pay their respects, to remember what had been stolen and what had been sacrificed to achieve justice. Dr. Marcus Chen visited his sister's name often, placing flowers and whispering apologies for the things he had built in her memory. The weapons that had killed hundreds of thousands haunted him now, reminding him of how close humanity had come to crossing a line from which there was no return. "I wanted to destroy them all," he confessed to Sarah Kim during one visit. "I had the power to sterilize their worlds, to end their entire species. Part of me still wishes I had done it. But you didn't," Sarah replied gently. "None of us did. We stopped before we became them. That has to count for something, does it? 7 million people are still dead. My nieces will never grow up, never have families of their own, never see the stars their parents dreamed about. How is showing mercy to their killers supposed to honor that?" Sarah had no good answer. Some questions had no satisfying responses, no neat resolutions that made the pain worthwhile. The dead were gone, and no amount of vengeance or mercy could bring them back. Fleet Admiral Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Remembrance, looking out at the stars that had witnessed so much bloodshed. The war was over, humanity victorious, but the victory felt hollow. They had saved themselves from genocide's repetition, but the cost had been terrible. "Admiral," a young ensign approached hesitantly, "there's a delegation of Vardani civilians requesting to speak with you. They say they want to apologize." Elena's first instinct was to refuse. What could apologies mean after everything that had happened? But she thought about President Okonkwo's words about justice versus revenge, about the difference between the two. Send them in. The Vardani who entered were not warriors or politicians. They were ordinary civilians, families and workers who had lived their lives under coalition rule, without understanding the horrors committed in their names. They looked at Elena with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "We cannot undo what was done," their spokesperson said, an elderly Vardeni female whose scales had faded to pale purple. "We cannot bring back your dead or erase the broadcast that showed their suffering, but we want you to know that not all of us approved. Not all of us celebrated. Some of us wept for your people, even as our government called them lesser beings." Elena wanted to rage at them, to demand why they hadn't stopped it, why they had allowed 7 million humans to die while they did nothing. But she recognized the futility in such accusations. The Vardeni civilians had been as powerless as she had been during the genocide, able only to watch in horror as their leaders committed atrocities. "I accept your apology," Elena said finally. "Not because it makes things right, but because someone has to start building peace from the ashes of this war." The transformation of galactic civilization proceeded rapidly after the war's end. The Galactic Assembly, which had offered only empty words during humanity's crisis, found itself replaced by a new governing body with human representatives holding significant influence. Species that had cheered during the genocide learned to fear the consequences of their choices. Earth itself had changed in ways that could never be undone. The peaceful explorers who had reached for the stars with hope and wonder were gone, replaced by a species that understood the galaxy's true nature. Human children now learned military tactics alongside mathematics, prepared for a cosmos that had proven itself hostile. The naivety of humanity's early space age had been burned away in the fires of genocide and war. President Okonkwo stood before a memorial ceremony marking the one-year anniversary of the genocide. 7 million candles lit the darkness, one for each life lost. She spoke to a crowd of millions, her words broadcast across human space and beyond. "We went to war for justice," she said. "We built terrible weapons and committed terrible acts in pursuit of that justice. We came close, so very close, to becoming the monsters we fought against. But we stopped. We chose mercy when we had the power to choose extinction. That choice defines us now, just as surely as the genocide defined our enemies. The 7 million are gone and nothing we do can bring them back. But we can honor their memory by being better than those who killed them. We can build a galaxy where genocide is met with justice rather than indifference, where the strong protect the weak rather than prey upon them. That is the legacy our dead deserve." On Var Prime, now under human administration, Vardeni children learned a new history that included humanity's perspective on the genocide. Some older Vardeni resisted, clinging to their species' former glory. But the young learned a different lesson, understanding that strength without wisdom led only to destruction. The galaxy would never forget the war that followed 7 million deaths. It became a cautionary tale, whispered among alien species as a warning about what happened when humans were pushed too far. Humanity had shown two faces during that terrible year: the capacity for devastating violence and the wisdom to temper that violence with mercy. Both faces were necessary. Both faces were real. Elena Vasquez retired from military service 2 years after the war's end, unable to continue commanding forces that reminded her daily of what humanity had become. She opened a school on the memorial grounds, teaching the next generation about the importance of both strength and restraint, about justice and mercy, about the fine line between protection and revenge. Dr. Marcus Chen's weapons were sealed away in secure vaults, preserved as reminders of humanity's darkest capabilities. He devoted the rest of his life to peaceful research, trying to atone for the devices he had created in grief and rage. Some nights he still dreamed about the stellar lance, about how close he had come to destroying an entire world. The 7 million dead became more than statistics or names on stone. They became symbols of why humanity fought, and why humanity had chosen to stop fighting. Every human child learned their stories, ensuring the genocide would never be forgotten or forgiven, but also never repeated in reverse. Warlord Threxis lived out his days in isolation, sustained by Vardeni longevity, but deprived of the glory he had once commanded. History recorded him not as a conqueror, but as a fool who had awakened something terrible and paid the price for his arrogance. The stars that had witnessed so much death slowly became peaceful again as humanity and its former enemies learned to coexist. It was not forgiveness, would never be forgiveness for what had been done. But it was peace, hard-won and carefully maintained, built on the understanding that some lines could never be uncrossed. Humanity had learned its place in the galaxy through blood and fire. That place was not as victims or as peaceful explorers, but as a species capable of terrible vengeance, who chose instead to pursue justice. The lesson had cost 7 million lives and nearly cost humanity its soul. But the lesson had been learned and the galaxy would never forget. Did you enjoy watching Earth's Fury? Want more epic HFY stories? Click here to see how humanity fights back in the next part of this thrilling saga.